Now this, Special Prosecutor Jack Smith has a history of taking on big cases and losing big time. So what is Trump up against when he faces Jack Smith? Maybe we could find out by looking back. Let's begin right here with John Edwards. Remember the high-profile once vice presidential candidate with John Kerry had a kid out of wedlock. He wanted to use campaign contributions, that's the allegation, in order to pay for that kid. And then they go ahead and decide to take him to trial because he was using campaign contributions to hide an affair. Well, when Jack Smith decided to try him, it turns out he was acquitted on one count, deadlocked on the other. Then he said, let me do it again. And the DOJ says, no, we're not going to do this again. Jack Smith loses. What about the high-profile 2015 case with Governor Bob McDonnell of Virginia? Now, he and his wife were accused of using that position to help out donors that supported them in their run for the Virginia governor spot. So he was tried on 11 different corruption counts, and he was convicted on that. It cost him $23 million. That conviction would be overturned because the Justice Department dropped the case and essentially went up to the Supreme Court, and 9-0 they went against Jack Smith. You want to know the reason why? Because they said basically, by Jack Smith's standard, no politician could ever do anything for anyone and not be charged arbitrarily. Here's Bob McDonnell talking over the weekend about the hell Jack Smith put him through.
I just think he's willing to stretch the law. And here's the problem, Michael. You know, as a lawyer, the ethical rules are you're supposed to, as a government attorney, a federal prosecutor, you're supposed to seek truth and justice, not merely to convict. It's a very different ethical duty. And I think maybe that's been the downfall in some of these cases. He'd rather win.
Senator Menendez, a similar situation. He got off in a case that many people thought would be a layup, that Senator Menendez was involved with some dicey situations. So why would Merrick Garland grab Jack Smith from The Hague and said, go try the former president and break precedent? Now let's get the reaction from George Washington University law professor, Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, I've watched you talk about the case against Trump, but not much about Jack Smith. How much does his background play into the charges and the course of this case?
Well, there are many people that think very highly of Smith. He does have a reputation, as you've noted, however, of stretching statutory provisions to the breaking point. In fact, they did break in front of the Supreme Court. They broke in front of jurors who did not buy, in the Edwards case, the type of theory that he was advancing. Now, having said that, he's not necessarily stretching the law here in terms of arguing obstruction. He's bringing cases and claims that the Department of Justice regularly prosecutes. But he does have a reputation for being extremely aggressive. He's sort of reminiscent of Wiseman, who was put as second in command in the Mueller case. Wiseman had a very controversial record of stretching federal laws and being reversed.
Why would Merrick Garland, knowing the weight on this case, and this is a possible opponent to the current president, why would he put someone this aggressive on a case when the objective should be justice, not conviction?
Well, you know, Merrick Garland has been pretty much absent without leave during this whole process. I'm not too sure why he selected Smith. Smith is known as being particularly aggressive as a prosecutor, as you've noted. But Garland is really, I wrote a piece recently about the sort of failure of Merrick Garland as Attorney General. When he took office, he said that one of his priorities was to reestablish the trust of the FBI and DOJ.
Nice try.
That trust level, according to polls, is actually lower now than what it was under his predecessor, Bill Barr.
And keep in mind, Jack Smith's also working on the January 6th case. So the president was asked, by the way, why not put Jack Smith on Joe Biden's case? That would have been an interesting little selection, but he didn't. He put on the docile Robert Hur. Meanwhile, President Trump last night talked about his case and why he didn't just hand over the documents and just got out of this mess before it started. Listen.
These boxes were interspersed with all sorts of things, golf shirts, clothing, pants, shoes. There were many things. I would say much more, not that I know of, but everything was declassified. And Biden didn't have the right to do that because he wasn't president. Nor did Mike Pence, by the way, have the right to do that because he wasn't president.
So there were golf shirts. He didn't have a chance to go through them. He also brought up, Jonathan, that I don't know if someone else stuck anything in there to make him look bad.
Well, first of all, that's hands down one of the best interviews I've ever seen of a president or former president. Brett Baier did an amazing job. And the level of detail really was quite shocking on a legal standpoint. I don't know if they had decided on their legal defense, but they have now. I mean, the position of the former president is that no such document existed at Mar-a-Lago in terms of that audio tape. He's now arguing that he was waving at documents that were like news articles and coverage of the Iran attack plan. We'll see how the DOJ responds to that. He did not really offer a defense to mishandling. He just simply argued that he has a right and that they criminalized the process. But the level of detail that Brett was able to get into in this interview was breathtaking. These are all likely admissible statements that can be used at trial.
Jonathan, but if they asked somebody in that room, what did Donald Trump show you on that audio tape? Because it seems like he was saying, I have this document and it's top secret. Normally I could declassify it if I was president, but I'm not president now. He says it was newspaper articles. Then will they go up to the people there and say, what did he show you?
I think so. I mean, they can call those witnesses, and Brett sort of pushed him on this and said, look, these are your words. You don't exactly come off as saying, here's a bunch of news clippings. I mean, it sounds like you're holding the document. But, you know, Trump can simply say that was bravado. It's the government's burden to show that this document existed. But this was an absolutely riveting interview. From a legal standpoint, I just don't have any precedent to point to of someone coming out in this detail with a pending indictment.
Right. Every time we talk about President Trump, you always say there's a precedent made. He actually does the interviews anywhere, anytime, and answers all your questions. It's bizarre, and it's enticing. Jonathan Turley, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.